Welly. Thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Mike, hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, man, I was really excited about this since we got to catch up a few weeks ago, and I think our audience is gonna love this one too.
Yeah, I'm excited. I listened to a few of the episodes since then, and I'm excited to add to the catalog. Great to be here.
Yeah, man. So we're gonna talk crypto today, one of my favorite contrarian asset classes. Maybe a little bias there. Give us your background. Let's introduce you.
Yeah. So just at a personal level, so I'm calling from the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been out here for about 15 years. I'm a New Yorker originally, um, and professionally, I've been in the crypto world starting about 10 years ago. Um, so I started my career in online advertising technology, got into consumer digital payments, the focus on gaming, long story. And then got into crypto in 2013. I started working for Ripple, was there for about 5.5 years. Um, had a stint in the private market space for an investment firm. Um, then focus in on crypto again, capital market stuff, prime brokerage. And then for the past couple of years, I've been working at a venture studio focused on Web3 consumer.
Yeah, it's super exciting, man. You're an OG, right? That's what it's called.
I wouldn't call myself that, but I've been called that. Yeah, it's been here for a long
Yeah,
time.
I get called it too, and OGs never feel like they're OGs, right? Like you can always remember when you were new to the crypto space and everybody else was an OG, and you
Yeah,
felt like super behind.
it still feels new. It all feels very new all the time.
Tell our audience about Ripple because I think it's a really important company, right? For a lot of different reasons. And what drew you to work with Ripple, and what drew you to crypto in general? Let's dive in there.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I joined Ripple in 2013. So the latter end of 2013, I had been working for about 4 years for a digital payments company, which um, really focused in on the gaming space. So think gaming like global, small transactions, really like an emerging market at the time. So think about like Facebook games, mobile games, very normal now, very weird at the time. And I just remember paying attention to the payments world, very big space, Visa, MasterCard, but a lot more than that. Um, and then, you know, I guess like the second half of 2013, someone from Ripple reached out about a job there. I remember just digging into it more. And I think the thing that really stuck out to me, it seemed like really interesting, like very weird. I mean, just blockchain seems weird today. It was very weird 10 years ago. But I think the thing that really stuck out to me was that it reminded me of the sci-fi book that I'd read a couple years earlier called Cryptonomicon. And just, long story short, it's basically about this borderless digital currency. And, candidly, I just thought it was just so cool that I was interviewing for a company that looked really close to what I read in this sci-fi book that I loved. And I just thought, obviously I did a bit more diligence into the company, the investors, and the business, but it was just hard to pass up an opportunity to do something that weird. So I was, yeah, excited to jump in. It was high risk, but um, a lot of fun. It's a good thing to jump into.
How big was Ripple when you joined it?
Yeah, it was. I think I was technically employee, maybe 16 or 17. I think. So I was part of a growth spurt. I think like 2 weeks earlier, there were maybe 9 people. So it was very small at the time. I Yeah, really interesting group. It was definitely a lot of the kind of libertarians, not necessarily Bitcoin maximalists, but people who'd come out of the Bitcoin world and were looking at just something better. I mean, even though Bitcoin is very new at the time, um, it did have its flaws. Ostensibly, it had some flaws, and the Ripple team, was really trying to look for a better way. Kind of realize a very similar vision, but with a very different technology. Uh, so yeah, super early
I,
times. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really incredible. I want to just highlight that. Like, I mean, how big was Ripple at its height?
How say it again? How big was it when?
I mean, how many employees? I mean, it's got to be in the thousands, right?
Now I think it's upwards of 500. When I left, it was crossing over 300. So it's become a kind of a big going concern. Yeah, yeah, it's one of the bigger players in the
Yeah,
space.
still super. You were super early.
Yeah, yeah, it was, really interesting time to be in crypto. Even back then, I would say like there's the business, the technology, and the culture. And I think in the culture side, it's a very tribalistic space. And Ripple, even now, definitely then was a really polarizing company. I remember um, even within a couple of weeks of joining the company, we'd launched a refresh on the website. And on the team page, the company was small enough that we could have every single face and name of everybody on the company on the page. And I just remember thinking, being at home and looking at my wife and looking at my dog and reading just like on Reddit posts, just all the hatred for Ripple. And I was thinking, I don't know if I want to have my name and face up here. Am I going to put us at peril? But it's funny. Fast forward today, even it can be a polarizing company, and the space is still very tribal for good and bad. Um, but interesting time to be joining that company.
What was driving all the negativity around Ripple?
Yeah, I think on the outside, it was a lot of the design of the technology. I think people would point to centralization as a moniker. Um, uh, what's now called XRP Ledger, now at the time was called the Ripple Ledger, this new blockchain. Um, it didn't have the equivalent of proof of work for Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin kind of set a lot of different standards in the crypto space, and one of them was basically around the distribution of this token. And for Bitcoin, it was, hey, if you contribute computing power to this network, you're going to get compensated in Bitcoin. And now XRP Ledger, back then Ripple Ledger, it didn't have that concept, and a lot of people just pushed back against that and said this is just wrong. I think not for any particular rational reason beyond just, hey, the benchmark of Bitcoin looked very different. Um, I think part of it is also it's a great technology. I mean, the XRP ledger is really powerful. It was the first decentralized exchange. I think it was the first decentralized exchange. It had an order router embedded in the blockchain. It could support tokenization of any asset. I know tokenization of real world assets is really big today. It looked like a really compelling technology, and I would think if I'm someone who was an advocate of a technology that looked similar but was potentially, technologically inferior, and I had a stake in the thing that was old, and this new thing came out, well, that would probably give me a cause for concern. So I think it was a bit of, you know, it was a bit from bucket A, a bit from bucket B, depending who you talk to.
Yeah, crypto does have this community of, this is the way we've always done things, which is fascinating for that to exist in a technology sector because generally technology enthusiasts or people that are passionate about technology are always reading sci-fi books like us and always imagining what the future is going to look like and we can't wait to get there. And so it's fascinating in crypto how you do have these communities where this is the way we've always done it, this is the way we want to do it, uh, kind of like a purist mentality.
Yeah, yeah. It's again, I'd say the world has gotten so much bigger since 10 years ago that you can find anybody of any stripe. Um, there are definitely people who are really just focused on the technology and not as much on the market. I'm obviously like much more just given the nature of my job and kind of my trajectory in the space, much more interested in like the market, business models. Not to say I'm not interested in the technology, but very easy to get totally lost in the tech. Um, I was thinking I was part of a blockchain forum that I was co-hosting a few weeks ago, and one of the members of the group was talking about this new layer two technology, and just this guy was a complete genius. I mean, it was just riveting to hear what he was talking about. But then after he was speaking for a few minutes, I was asking, well, who's going to be the customer of this? Who's going to pay for this? And his response was, I have no idea. It's not my job. I'm just here to make sure that I can come up with the best technology possible. And yeah, I think there's a spectrum here. People are just totally focused on making money. People are just totally passionate about the technology, and I find I'm maybe kind of like a little bit further on this side of the spectrum. Um, but there are hardcore members on either side.
Yeah, you and me have talked about this, and maybe this is a good transition to your studio work because I'm sure you do a lot of this assessment. But technology for technology's sake is not a successful business, right? In fact, the pinnacle of good technology is that I think nobody cares or they don't even understand what's going on behind the scenes. You think of, Steve Jobs' whole example is you should be able to give a toddler an iPad and they should be able to navigate it, and they don't know anything about that technology. And sometimes that gets lost. And I think in crypto in general, right? I mean, this has been written a lot about in traditional startup sectors, right? You have like lean startup that kind of like laid out this blueprint, but I think there does need to be more focus on who's going to buy this, what problem that currently exists, is this solving, and does your customer recognize this? How do you incorporate those kind of principles in your studio work? And tell us about the studio because I'm super
Sure.
excited to hear about it, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So just for background, Superlayer, it's a venture studio. So venture studio, we take an outside capital, but we invest it into companies that we start in-house. Unlike traditional VC, you'd only make external investments, or incubator, you incubate external companies. We're more of a kind of like a network of founders and operators versus traditional investors. Um, and the studio is founded by a couple of serial entrepreneurs, two who had more recently-ish co-founded a company called Forte, which is big in kind of like the enterprise blockchain gaming space. Very large business. And then longer ago, we've got a number of the founders of this esports company called Gen G, also very successful in their space. And before that, a games company called Kabam. And Kabam, short of it here, is one of the pioneers in social and mobile gaming. So just think about like a new medium for gaming. People playing games on Facebook, people playing games on their iPhone or Android phone. Um, but they're also pioneers in free to play, which is a new type of business model for gaming. And I think that's interesting because if you bring that back around to what we're doing over here, we are really focused on building up interesting apps that would appeal to more of a mainstream audience than just crypto natives, but also trying to innovate on the business model so that it's not just about, you know, hype, speculation. Um, if you look at a lot of successful projects in retrospect, a lot of them just timed them really well. I was talking to um, someone through work just last week, and we were talking about this very prominent project. I don't want to name it, but they said, "Look, the content was okay, the business was okay. There wasn't anything that innovative about it, but they just timed the market perfectly, and then as a result, just generated billions of dollars in value. It didn't last, um, but that's just not sustainable, right? If if the big innovation coming out of crypto is that you create companies that just capture that kind of speculative interest in the upswing of a market, it's just really hard to see how that's going to last a very long time. So we're really focused on, hey, how can you create consumer app stuff that people can really touch and use, but also with a business model that's more durable.
And why does that's super interesting? Why does gaming need Web3? Like, why is Web3 a superior path forward for the gaming industry?
Yeah, yeah. So, 10 different people, 10 different answers. And I think people will look at it from the services stack perspective. So, like, where do you host identity? The liquidity of items within these games. So, how can you have effectively, effectively like a universal marketplace so that any sort of inventory of items or skins that you buy or earn while playing a game, when you get bored of that game when you leave, instead of just being a dead weight, you can go liquidate this for something else. Um, I think our perspective is we really like this idea of common ownership. So you think about Bitcoin as a better way to move or store money. Well, not only does it have these potentially these mechanical advantages, but also you can be kind of an owner and a contributor to the value of that protocol. So we like looking at the lens of consumer applications and consumer services, um, with that in mind. So how can we really enable ownership? So in this case, it would be like creating a game where there is a token that provides really clear utility that's kind of integral to the game, and then as the game grows, becomes more successful, the utility of that grows in step. And then how do people who are power contributors, power users, early contributors, how do they have effectively an ownership stake in that as well? I think that's a big promise of Web3 that we want to deliver on.
Mm. I think of the analogy when you describe it, right? So it's like we all grew up playing games, and the always the parental kind of echo was, you're just wasting time here. And you think of the time you invest in video games. I think everyone has gone down the rabbit hole that plays video games, and at one point they were horrified at how much time I've spent on this thing, and I'm not able to extract any value in exchange for my time, which obviously time is a very valuable commodity. But I think what you're describing here is the ability to suddenly monetize that time. And maybe a good analogy is, being an Uber driver. Whether I had a friend that used to, he used to drive an hour and a half for work, and he would just Uber drive on the way back. And it was a way for him to take this wasted time and monetize it. And whether you're somebody that does that, or the casual gamer, or you're somebody that, oh, I want to be a full-time Uber driver, or I want to be a full-time gamer. Now I think what you're saying is like, that's actually a career path. That's actually a way that you can at least generate some value in exchange for your time, and take that value with you, versus it just being a waste.
Yeah. I think that there is one path where, like, I think Web3 gaming to date has been, hey, if you are a gamer and you love playing games, how can you make money off of that? How can you turn that into a career? And I think that's what the first version of Web3 gaming really demonstrated. I think going forward, there's going to be an opportunity for that, but we're probably going to see more of a specialization where you have people who are, and I think this is true for Bitcoin again, people who are very strong advocates for this game and can get the right gamers on board or get the right business partners on board. We think there's a lot to do around advertising, just given that the gaming advertising market is huge. People need to learn about games, or game developers need to acquire gamers somehow. You can kind of apply that same sort of logic to really any sort of consumer industry. Um, but where is there an opportunity for users to contribute value to this platform overall, not just by gaming? I think that just by playing games, it's not adding a ton of value. Maybe you're providing feedback to the game. But if you're playing games and if you are watching ads, or if you're making purchases, if you're actually contributing to the revenue that the platform earns, that's really valuable. And I think that people should be able to get compensated for that to some extent, beyond just being able to earn virtual currencies or things that are cosmetic within the game.
Interesting. So kind of like what Instagram and YouTube has done with influencers, we're kind of applying that now to gaming, where
Yeah, I
you're
think
able to get some reward.
Yeah, I think that probably Andreessen Horowitz has done the best job of articulating this. So taking exactly what you're saying, that you have these large Web2, largely social media platforms, and it just talks about the kind of the value capture of the platform, and in some cases the dissemination. Some platforms have been doing a really good job of distributing the revenue that they earn back to the creators that are actually contributing value to it. And I think the vision of Web3 is that, look, there's an opportunity for consumers to get just a lot more of that, to provide a lot more value, and then get kind of commensurate value in return. Um, that's a big promise today. And yeah, I think that's what's really attractive about looking at like the consumer application use cases for crypto and Web3 is there's a lot of market value today in the Web2 world that stands to be disrupted or maybe shifted over to this Web3 world. So if you're a company that can create the types of businesses that captures that value along the way, you can become a really valuable company.
Yeah, that's super That's super contrarian. It's like, why play a game that you have no ability to monetize your time or your contributions when you could play? It's like people do a lot of things in absence of a better solution. But once the better solution comes out, why would you ever go back to investing hundreds of hours, doing being in a gaming community? Maybe that's the best way to put it. When you could just effectively do the same thing for a system that's going to reward you.
Totally. Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
guys focused on that? The studio. How are you guys focused on that studio? What are you guys tinkering on right now over there?
Yeah, yeah. So we're really focusing on a project right now called Taki Games. And Taki Games, it's essentially a developer and publisher of casual games. And as I alluded to before, um, we think there's a lot of interesting applications of advertising as a monetization method and as kind of like a pillar of a new type of Web3 application business model. So we are very simply just creating these casual games. We're monetizing them through advertising. And for users who are watching these ads and effectively generating value for the platform, what we're doing is we're rewarding users in tokens. So we are um, making purchases on the open market of the platform's native token and rewarding that to users instead of the status quo, which would be awarding users gift cards or in-game items or in-game credits. So the idea is that we're effectively taking this, what is a very large market. I didn't realize this until a few months ago when I started digging into this. Just high level, the gaming market is about $200 billion. About half of that is in mobile. And then for mobile game advertising, last year, the industry spent about $26 billion. So part of what we're doing here with this first instantiation of this app is to basically start taking this revenue and bring it on chain. I think that's really powerful. I'm excited about that, and I think that anybody who buys into this Web3 vision should be excited about it as well.
Yeah, it's so funny. I have some experience with this. So like, I've downloaded a mobile game before, and it's like it's impossible to level up, or it's very slow, and obviously it's designed this way. And you can watch an ad and suddenly, you get some in-game benefit. But total game changer to take that out of just an in-game benefit to just a benefit in general. Consume this ad. You're in this game, you're doing something, consume this ad. Now you're going to get rewarded in a way that is actually monetizable, and you can take that and apply those rewards somewhere else. Maybe you can apply them within the game, but that freedom to do what you will with the compensation of your time and effort is it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's super cool. I think just the easiest way to look at this is, yeah, Mike, just as you were saying, just imagine if that were the status quo, and imagine if someone came up to you and said, "Hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we take all the value that you're earning today, instead just restrict it to living inside the app, and you can only earn gift cards?" I think it would just seem like a huge step backwards. Again, if that were the status quo,
Yes.
and it's just it's sometimes it's very difficult to convey what's the potential over here because a lot of people, especially have been in the industry for a long time, just hard for them to see this. Not to say that there aren't major advocates of Web3 in the traditional game space. It's just kind of hard to see, right? You're just kind of used to the business there. And I even saw this at Ripple a lot. I spent a lot of time with really big, global banks, big national banks, big regional banks, central banks, and you can come to them and say, "Hey, here is this technology which effectively would make transactions a commodity, like drive the costs and the delays down to zero, make this thing, like moving information through the internet." I think it's really exciting. um, but you have people who aren't necessarily kind of lobbying against this, but they're just used to the way the things they are. They also appreciate how hard it is to change the status quo, especially if these big entrenched businesses. But I think what that generally leads to is you're going to find either an emerging class of consumers or an emerging class of businesses who really need something like this, and those end up becoming your first customers, your second customers. I, anyway, I think this is just kind of the natural cycle of uh, what is it, innovator's dilemma, right? The bigger guys are eventually going to catch up, but initially you just got to find those people who get the vision at the outset.
Yeah, it's like you ask somebody, 100 years ago, hey, we're thinking about inventing a car. Do you think that's a good idea? I say, why? We have horses, right? And this is classic. You put it very eloquently, the innovator's dilemma, which is you get this feedback from the market. I think it was Henry Ford that said, if I asked what people wanted, they want a faster horse. And people don't think about these technology curves and how they're going to completely change the landscape. And the reason they change the landscape is in contrast to what was there. And before you have that, unless you have that contrast. So, the idea of like sending crypto in seconds to somebody and them receiving the money. Well, somebody in banking might say, but we have wires, right? And we have the ability to do that, but it's different. It's better. And it only really comes out when it's compared and it's contrasted to the old way of doing things.
Totally. Yeah.
What's your process like at the studio when you guys come up with new ideas?
Yeah. So we take the kind of like a proven studio approach. We draw a lot of inspiration from Atomic Ventures, which is one of the most successful pioneers in the studio space. Studio model's been around for a very long time, but it's kind of come to the fore relatively recently. The idea is really taking an existing type of business that seems to be doing well, but where you can see an opportunity to basically take the depth of experience of the members of the studio, apply that to this model, innovate on one or more angles on, again, an existing business, just try and make it a lot more successful. Um, and I think that's a good example of what we're looking at with Taki Games. With Taki Games, the content really isn't that innovative. They're really games that we know have already resonated with the market because you can just look at the App Store stats and see, how many users these types of apps have, how much revenue they're generating, or at least, relative to other apps. Um, but we do see also in the Web3 space, there are these fairly rudimentary games in terms of content and gameplay where the token model is really resonating with users. And I think if you combine these two things, you can say, look, there's a really interesting opportunity to take what's working in both of these fields, add in this other element of basically revised tokenomic and business model, and come up with something new. So you can take that, apply that across a variety of different consumer categories. In this case, just happens to be gaming. No guarantee it's going to work, but we're going to do our best.
So you guys are looking outside of gaming. You're not just specifically focused on gaming.
Not just specifically gaming. We've looked at a variety of categories, social content creator platforms, but our focus right now it's very much on gaming. How do we take what's now, I think, like a relatively a tiny industry, like the numbers here, traditional gaming, there's an estimate of somewhere north of 3 billion people that play games today on a daily basis. It's safe to say that there are hundreds of millions of people playing even just, any single game. Think about the Fortnites and Robloxes of the world. And in crypto, the measure that people look at is how many wallets, how many self-custodied crypto wallets are actually engaging with Web3 games. And it's typically around 700,000 a day, just this tiny, tiny fraction of what's out there. So we look at that. I think especially the Kabam founders that are part of the team, they look at this market through the lens of what they did, starting in, I think Kabam was founded in 2006. It ended up selling for about $1 billion, I think, in around 2017. And just say there's a lot more, there's a lot more room to grow over here. So we're very focused on gaming right now.
Well, it's also a rapidly growing market. I mean, you gave analytics of what it is today, but I mean, I'm sure. I mean, maybe you have them off the cuff, but I'm sure even a couple years ago, drastically smaller.
Yeah. In some markets, the mobile gaming market is the fastest growing. It's still growing 100% year over year. It's it's become so much broader as well, right? Just uh, people who are newer to gaming are usually surprised to hear that the industry is just so much larger than Hollywood. Um, I don't know what the numbers are like for Star Wars the movies and Star Wars the games, but they're probably not too far off. This IP can really travel well beyond Hollywood and um, really generate a lot more revenue in gaming as well. And it's generally become like entertainment, right? It's not just Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty. It's still solitaire, very popular game. Um, it's something that's really accessible to a lot of people, and I think that's why in the crypto world, I'd love to hear if you guys have done some interesting research on the fund here, just looking at how you're looking at your portfolio. But in the crypto world, we're thinking about how do you make this new technology accessible to mainstream audience, and gaming has traditionally been one of the major categories to bring a lot of people into social, mobile, get them more engaged. It seems safe to assume that that's going to happen for Web3 and crypto as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to look. I'm a big lean startup. I've mentioned a few times principles person. I think you have to look at what problem is this solving first. So technologists can get into this habit of solving things for no reason, right? Or I think Elon Musk said, it's he always talks to his engineers. He said the biggest mistake engineers make is they never ask, should this ever been invented in the first place? They just keep building and reiterating and improving on something that never should have been built. In banking, right, you see customers, for example, saying, hey, if I can't store my digital assets where I bank, then I'm going to consider switching banks. I think when you talk about real world asset tokenization, which for the audience is simply saying, here's something like fine art or something like a collector's item, or maybe a skyscraper that you couldn't afford yourself. Could we fractionalize the ownership of that into like a million or a billion or infinitely divisible, and basically now open up more liquidity in the markets and more accessibility to investors, but also maybe put that capital to work to generate interest on the value of that, which is kind of what DeFi does in general. Well, I think like institutions are going to really gravitate towards that early. In fact, you just saw JP Morgan announced they're going to start tokenizing funds very, very, very recently, like in the last few days, because as a traditionally illiquid space, I think it's who's the customer and what are they asking for, and are they going to appreciate the innovation? And like to your point, like the minute somebody tells me I can get some sort of monetization or reward for playing a game that's either I wasn't getting any reward before, or it was a much limited more reward, like you can only use this for in-game credits. uh, Clearly that's what I'm going to gravitate towards, and I think you guys have seen that, and you guys are really laser focused on that.
Totally. Yeah, and I just to comment on the should this even exist? Should this be invented? Um, it's funny. I think just looking back in the past 10 years, crypto probably looks really confusing to people who come from traditional finance, traditional payments, just traditional, I don't know, kind of like financial structure, because crypto has gone through these evolutions of basically just reinventing things that are kind of well known in finance for 100 years and challenging them in many cases just the wrong way. Like, a lot of people have made very I think just like silly kind of declarations about what crypto can solve, like just this idea of like real-time settlement, like always settling in the full amount of whatever the transaction necessitates, and just ignores the idea of credit and like the value of credit, um, the value of intermediating counterparties to just make transaction systems more fluid. And 10 years ago, there was this very kind of vocal outcry against basically just the system of credit. In the transaction scenario, would be something like clearing, right? Just, hey, let's just exchange IOUs until we kind of settle out a net position at the end of the day. This is how Visa works and ACH and everything. And then now, layer twos are a hot new thing. It's the way to scale out these blockchains. It's just funny to see how a lot of this stuff, which is very old, is becoming new and hot in crypto again. Um, and even like these concepts of CBDCs. I mean, it's just been around for decades. Like at Ripple, we spent just like a lot more time reading Swift and Bank of International Settlements white papers on you know the history of different transaction systems, the design of them today, and just hey, if you were to reimagine them with this new type of technology, what would it look like? And there are people in gosh, over 20 years ago who were writing papers about exactly that. They just didn't call it blockchain. Um, and yeah, maybe that's part of a secret sauce that some companies have is that they just see what didn't work in the past, good ideas, and why, and then just try and do it again, but with a different type of technology that can unlock that opportunity, create very successful companies. I think it's a great way to do it. I studied history in college, so go history.
Yes, we need more history in crypto. More, we don't need to remake the mistakes of the past. I think that's important. How do you guys incorporate that in the studio work? And I think maybe this is applicable, honestly, to any audience when you're assessing any investment, but also maybe we'll focus in on crypto since that's the theme. But how do you make sure that you're not making that mistake where you're investing in a core concept or technology that's really reinventing the wheel or building something that ultimately nobody's going to want or appreciate?
Yeah, yeah. You're just reminding me when you were interviewing David Cohen from Techstars, and he was talking about I think it was like applying artificial intelligence to the internal data sets they had, and basically reconciling what did their kind of internal human tuition tell them about what lessons worked. What did what did the data actually show when you had in theory this unbiased bot trawl through it and try and come up with some conclusions. So I think it's just that you have to really pay attention to the data, see where the money's going, not just an indication of hey, how do we make a lot of money, but just really understand what is the state of the market today and what is it rewarding. And something that a pitfall I think that we need to be really considerate of is hey, things that really worked out really well in the crypto space in 2017, 2018, 2021, it's just not going to be the same in the future. There's going to be, a little bit of recursion here. Like some aspects are going to continue to be rewarded, but um, I think just this concept that crypto for the first time now is undergoing a real macro cycle. In the meantime, crypto is kind of was born into and then has rode one of the longest bull runs in history at a macro level, and kind of within its industry has seen its ups and downs, but globally really hasn't dealt with this type of market cycle. And I think it's just important to recognize that. I think that's why we are really obsessed with business model right now. It's not just hey, how do you create a flashier version or more complex version of this thing that resonated really well with the market in the last 6 months. How can you create something that's new that's actually going to survive the downswing in a market cycle? I think that's super interesting to us.
I love what you said. I mean, when I get asked for advice from entrepreneurs, usually it's around raising money, right? And what do I need to say, or how do I need to present my story? And I always say the same thing, which is like, look, just tell me why this is a good business, right? Like, say we make this for $1, we sell it for 10, and we're going to be very profitable. We're going to be self-sustaining, and I think to your point, you have a lot of crypto projects that were able to raise a tremendous amount of money and have these big war chests. And maybe they're starting to think of this now, but traditionally, like in the past, historically, they haven't thought about just is this a good business, right? Versus is this an interesting company that's working on interesting things, which is valuable to some degree. But I mean, I love what you said. We're here to build a business, and we're here to build something self-sustaining.
Yeah, and it's hard to parse that externally. um, I'm very focused on my day to day. Again, we do a lot more founding and operating than we do investing. Um, yeah, it's really hard to parse the market. I do not I do not um, envy your position of like basically how to scan the whole market and figure out what's out there. Even just the mechanics of investing in crypto, it's such a pain. like I'm more of a a boglehead, Vanguard acolyte. How do you just get an index of something and bet on the industry as a whole? Expecting it's going to be much bigger 10, 20 years from now versus trying to pick out the real winners. That's just hard to do in crypto. It's really hard to do. I used to just manually go through the spreadsheet, taking data of different market caps and try to weight these things, do this on a somewhat reasonable interval. It's just painful. It's really hard to do. Um, so yeah, it's tough. It's tough from the inside, but also I'm very sympathetic with people who are trying to invest from the outside. Not an easy industry to approach.
Well, and there's so much noise, right? And I don't think we have fully efficient markets. But at the heart of it, I've gotten asked by investors, where does the volatility come from in crypto? And of course, that's a multi-layer answer. But the easiest to understand analogy I give, because many of them have sold companies, right? And they've been an entrepreneur or involved with entrepreneurs. And it's, look, if you could price a startup in real time, right? So think, Welly, you guys have a studio company. They're talking to Microsoft about a pilot. And Microsoft says, we want to do a pilot. So now instantly the value of that stock goes from $1 to $5, right? And everybody's happy. Everybody looks like a genius that bought it at $1. And some people now are buying it at $5 because they say, oh, like this is going to continue to happen. And then Microsoft does a pilot and they say, hey, we're not going to be a customer long term, but we really enjoy doing the pilot. So now it goes from $5 back to $1, maybe 50 cents. And of course, a lot of that is driven by the information, but mostly it's driven by people's reaction to the information. Now, in venture, you don't have that in the sense of you have to do all your homework up front. You're kind of along for the ride. And generally, companies don't get valued except when they raise new capital. So, like, we'll call it every 2 years. So it's like kind of this question mark. Like, I think they're doing good, but how does that good translate? Well, we're going to have to see based on new investors' appetite, in 2 years, or based on that somebody wants to buy them, or some other maybe fundamental financial metric but that's less applicable for an early stage company. And so when you really understand, like, in a perfect world, in 10 years, when the crypto markets are, or we'll say very efficient, it's less due to like noise and people panicking and different things like that, or people attempting price manipulation or marketing. It's just like a real-time pricing of assets. And, that's a curse and a blessing. It's a blessing in the sense of you can exit or enter a position at any time. You mentioned David Cohen. David Cohen and I were talking about this, where it's like, you know, a lot of people invest in early companies. David got into Uber very early, and you're kind of dragged to the success line to some degree, right? Like maybe you would have sold Uber stock instantly once you had 3x your money, right? Because that's incredible return. But you got dragged to 100x because you were locked in it. But now you can sell it. And so, of course, now you have to be confronted with the reality that most people would have sold it. And you've seen this countless, I'm sure, all the time in crypto. People either hold something of no fundamental value way too long, or they subsequently, which I would argue you should never been in the first place, or subsequently they will hold something of tremendous value not long enough.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the $100 million pizza or whatever that somebody bought with Bitcoin, in
Right.
2009. Yeah, it's just, I mean, that person does not love. Every year, on the dot, people are like, "Hey, how much has that pizza been now?" You're like, "Oh my god." Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
it's funny. Yeah, I mean, just looking at this world through the lens of markets, public markets, private markets, some really interesting innovations from that perspective. And meanwhile, there's this benefit of this ostensible benefit of market liquidity. A lot of these crypto projects have tokens that are liquid. You can trade in and out of them very easily. But it also just invites a lot of bad actors. I even I'm thinking when I was at Ripple, we put a lot of thought into, yeah, what is the customer, what's the problem that we're solving, why do we exist, what makes this thing unique and something that people should genuinely care about, right? Not just gloss, but care about. And I remember we were coming up with this concept of network of networks. So not just a payment network, but kind of like a meta network that would let different payment networks talk to each other, move around Valley very easily. And I just remember we'd gone through this effort of coming up with that. We put it on our website, and then a few months later, we saw on I think it was a Visa or Mastercard site, they had the exact same messaging. We were thinking, come on, man, give us a little bit more lead time. But there's a lot of this imitation. Just to be clear, Visa, Mastercard, amazing companies. What are the odds this is just a coincidence? Pretty high, but you never know. I mean, we're talking to these companies a lot. But in the crypto world, you'd see a lot of crypto businesses taking Ripple's messaging, the concept, and just taking copy paste, but put a different brand on top of it. And then we would step into a meeting with some big Australian bank or German bank or Singaporean bank, and they would say, "Yeah, yeah, we just met these guys who do exactly what you do. What are you doing here? What makes you?" You're like, oh my god, this this world where, yeah, there's these
Yeah.
Microsoft's pilots. There's just there's like an arms race to see who can get the most out of announcements as quickly as possible, and that doesn't make for a great long lasting business. But I'm optimistic that
One, of
what with
course.
yeah.
Yeah. No, continue.
I was just gonna say, I hope things change. Right now that crypto is kind of facing this downswing of a macro market cycle, I just think it's going to change. As a studio, that's kind of what we need to anticipate and solve for.
Well, yeah, I mean, all markets move towards more efficiency and more fundamental driven, or they die, right? So I think crypto has to grow up. That's the term I use. The idea of like your token doesn't necessarily increase in value if the company makes a lot of money. That's absurd. And the idea of you can just say you do something or going to do something and you get rewarded for it instantaneously versus ever having to deliver on that promise. I think that's going to start to go away. To your point, it's really easy for someone to lift from a core quality team that's working on solving a problem and has a high chance of doing it. It's really easy to just lift that language and say, well, we're doing that too, but you have to actually deliver, and that's where it really matters.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, yeah, again, I don't envy the position of having to figure out which of these projects are going to stand and be successful, because there's a lot to wade through, and a lot of it's just bad. A lot of companies just aren't going to deliver. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a complex market.
Well, it's super fun, man. We're out of time, but this has just blown by. Loved having you on. Can't wait to do it again soon.
Thanks so much, Mike. This is a lot of fun. And thanks again for having me on. Delighted to be here. This is great.